The rain hammered against the metal roof of the repair shop, creating a steady drumbeat that had become background noise to Tae-hyun's life. He sat hunched over a broken mining drone, his hands black with grease, his eyes tired from another long day of work that barely paid the bills. The shop smelled of oil, burnt circuits, and the cheap noodles he'd eaten for lunch 3 hours ago. New Seoul Station wasn't the glamorous colony the promotional videos had promised. It was a dying outpost on the edge of human space, where the only people who stayed were those too poor to leave or too stubborn to admit defeat. Tae-hyun was probably both. His small repair shop sat in the lower district, wedged between a pawn shop and a bar that never closed. The flickering neon sign outside read, "Tae's Repairs," with the apostrophe burnt out months ago. He was about to call it a day when he heard the soft chime of his shop door opening. Tae-hyun looked up, expecting to see Old Man Park coming to complain about his coffee maker again. Instead, he found himself staring at something he'd never seen before. A small alien child stood in his doorway, no taller than his workbench. Her skin shimmered with a soft blue light, like moonlight on water. Her features were delicate, almost crystalline, and her large eyes were filled with tears that caught the dim light of his shop. She wore a simple cloak that was too big for her, dragging on the greasy floor. Tae-hyun had seen aliens before. The station had a few traders and workers from various species. But this child was different. There was something refined about her, something that didn't belong in his dirty corner of the universe. In her small arms, she clutched what looked like an android. It was small, probably designed as a companion toy, but even damaged and covered in scorch marks, Tae-hyun could tell it was technology far beyond anything he'd ever worked on. The metal was too smooth, the joints too precise. This wasn't human-made. The child looked up at him with those enormous eyes and said something in a language that sounded like wind chimes and whispers. Tae-hyun didn't understand a word, but he understood the universal language of a crying child holding a broken toy. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his already filthy work pants. He pointed at the android, then at his workbench, raising his eyebrows in question. The child nodded eagerly, fresh tears spilling down her luminescent cheeks. She carefully placed the android on his workbench and stepped back, watching him with desperate hope. Tae-hyun pulled his work light closer and began to examine the android. The damage was severe. Whatever had happened had nearly destroyed it. Burn marks scarred the chest plate, several limbs hung at wrong angles, and when he carefully opened the access panel, he found melted circuits and destroyed components he couldn't even identify. He looked at the child and shook his head slowly, trying to convey that this might be impossible. But her face crumpled, and she made a sound so heartbroken that Tae-hyun felt it in his chest. She whispered something that sounded like a name, over and over, touching the android's damaged face with her small fingers. Tae-hyun sighed. He was going to regret this. He held up one finger, telling her to wait, and turned back to the android. He'd try. He couldn't promise anything, but he'd try. The work was unlike anything he'd attempted before. The alien technology was sophisticated beyond his experience, but the basic principles were the same. Power needed to flow, circuits needed to connect, joints needed to move. He worked through the night, the child sitting quietly in the corner, never leaving, never complaining. He couldn't replace the alien components he didn't understand, so he improvised. Where delicate alien circuits had melted, he bridged them with human-made alternatives. Where sophisticated power regulators had failed, he installed simpler human versions. It was like performing surgery with kitchen tools, but slowly, impossibly, the android began to look whole again. Dawn light was creeping through the grimy windows when Tae-hyun made the final connection. His hands shook from exhaustion and too much coffee. The child had fallen asleep in the corner, her head resting on her arms, but she jerked awake the moment he stepped back from the workbench. Tae-hyun pressed the power button, not knowing what to expect. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hum, the android's eyes began to glow. Its head turned slowly, taking in its surroundings. It looked down at itself, at the mismatched repairs and human components grafted onto its alien frame. The child gasped and rushed forward. The android turned to her and spoke in that same wind chime language. The child threw her arms around it, sobbing with joy. The android hugged her back gently. Its movements smooth despite Tae-hyun's rough repairs. Tae-hyun smiled, exhaustion washing over him. He didn't need to understand their language to know he'd done something good. The child turned to him, her face radiant with happiness. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small, crystalline object, no bigger than a coin. She pressed it into his grease-stained hand and closed his fingers around it. Before he could react, she took the android's hand and ran out of the shop. Tae-hyun stood there, holding the mysterious crystal, watching the empty doorway. The rain had stopped. Morning light filled his shabby shop, making even the grease stains look golden. He looked down at the crystal in his palm. It was beautiful, probably valuable, but he had no idea what it was or who that child had been. Just another strange encounter in a strange universe. He slipped it into his pocket and turned back to his regular work. The mining drone still needed fixing, and rent was due next week. Tae-hyun had no idea that his simple act of kindness had just changed the course of galactic history. 2 weeks passed like any other in Tae-hyun's life. He fixed broken equipment, argued with customers about prices, and ate cheap noodles for most meals. The strange encounter with the alien child had faded into memory, though he sometimes touched the crystal in his pocket and wondered about her. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning. Tae-hyun was replacing a power cell in a handheld scanner when the emergency sirens began to wail. His first thought was another meteor shower or a station malfunction. But then the announcement came through every speaker on the station, the administrator's voice tight with barely controlled panic. All residents remain calm. Unknown vessels have entered orbit. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Tae-hyun stepped outside his shop and looked up through the massive viewport that formed the ceiling of the lower district. His breath caught in his throat. Ships hung in space above the station, but calling them ships felt like calling an ocean a puddle. They were massive beyond comprehension, elegant and deadly, their hulls gleaming with a soft blue light that reminded him of the child's skin. People poured into the streets, pointing and shouting. Fear rippled through the crowd like electricity. These weren't human ships. These weren't any ships anyone on the station recognized. Within an hour, station security was going door to door in the lower district. When they reached Tae-hyun's shop, 4 guards in full armor stood at his door. The lead guard, a woman named Officer Kim that he'd seen around the station, looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Tae-hyun?" she asked, though she clearly knew who he was. "Yes? You need to come with us. Right now." His stomach dropped. "What did I do?" "That's what we'd all like to know," she said, her hand resting on her weapon. "Those ships up there? They're asking for you by name." The walk to the station administration building was the longest of Tae-hyun's life. People stared at him as security marched him through the streets. Whispers followed him like ghosts. What had he done? Was this about the child? Had he somehow broken some alien law by repairing that android? The administration building's main hall had been converted into a command center. Screens showed the alien ships from multiple angles. Station Administrator Lee stood surrounded by advisors, all of them looking terrified. When Tae-hyun was brought in, every eye turned to him. "That's him?" Administrator Lee asked. Before anyone could answer, a new voice filled the room. It came from the main screen, speaking perfect human language with only the slightest musical quality. We confirm. That is the human Tai Hyun. On the screen stood an alien figure in elaborate armor that seemed to be made of the same material as the ships. Tall, elegant, and utterly inhuman. Their face was hidden behind a helmet that reflected light like a mirror. "I am First Envoy Minho of the Valerian Imperium," the figure said. "We have come to escort the human Taehyun to an audience with Empress Yuna. This is not a request." Administrator Lee stepped forward, trying to sound official despite the tremor in his voice. "On what grounds? What are the charges?" "There are no charges," Minho replied. "The Empress requests his presence. No harm will come to him. You have my word as first envoy." "And if we refuse?" Lee asked, though everyone in the room knew it was a meaningless question. Those ships could vaporize the entire station without effort. "You will not refuse," Minho said simply. "Taehyun, you have 1 hour to prepare. Bring nothing but yourself. You will be provided for." The screen went dark. The next hour passed in a blur. Administrator Lee tried to prepare him, to coach him on diplomatic protocol, but Taehyun barely heard the words. His mind raced through every possibility, none of them making sense. An empress wanted to see him? Why? The only unusual thing he'd done recently was repair that android for the strange child. When the hour ended, a small shuttle descended from one of the massive ships. It landed in the station's main docking bay, and Taehyun was escorted there by what felt like half the station's security force. The entire population seemed to have gathered to watch, pressing against barriers, their faces filled with fear and curiosity. The shuttle door opened, and 2 Valerian guards emerged. They were tall, their armor gleaming, their movements precise. They bowed slightly to Taehyun, which surprised everyone present. "Please come with us," one said in perfect human language. "You are an honored guest of the Imperium." The flight to the flagship was brief but overwhelming. The shuttle's interior was beautiful in a way that made Taehyun feel like he was tracking dirt through a museum. The guards treated him with careful courtesy, offering him water and a seat by the window where he could watch the station shrink behind them. The flagship grew larger as they approached, and larger still, until it filled the entire view. They docked in a bay that could have held a dozen stations like New Seoul. Taehyun stepped out onto a floor so polished he could see his reflection, a grimy mechanic in work clothes standing in a palace. "This way, please," the guard said, gesturing down a corridor that seemed to be made of crystalline light. They walked for what felt like miles through halls that defied human engineering. Everything was beautiful, elegant, and utterly alien. Other Valerians passed them, stopping to stare at the human being escorted through their ship. Some bowed. Others merely watched with expressions Taehyun couldn't read. Finally, they reached massive doors that stood at least 30 feet tall. They were decorated with symbols and patterns that seemed to move in the light. The doors opened silently, revealing a throne room that took Taehyun's breath away. The ceiling stretched up into what looked like infinity, filled with stars that might have been real or might have been decoration. Columns of light supported nothing and everything. And at the far end of the enormous room, on a throne that seemed to be made of captured starlight, sat a figure of absolute authority. Empress Yuna was tall and regal, her skin the same luminescent blue as the child's had been. She wore robes that flowed like water and starlight, and on her head rested a crown that hurt to look at directly. Her face was beautiful in a way that was almost frightening, ancient and young at the same time. Taehyun was led forward. He didn't know if he should bow or kneel or what. He settled for standing still, trying not to shake. And then he saw them. Standing beside the throne, holding the Empress's hand, was the small child from his shop. And beside her, pristine and perfect, stood the android he had repaired. The child smiled at him, a brilliant expression of pure joy. The Empress looked down at her daughter, then back at Tae-hyun, and for the first time since entering the throne room, he saw something familiar in her alien features. She was a mother looking at the man who had made her daughter smile. The silence in the throne room felt heavy enough to crush Tae-hyun. Dozens of Valerian courtiers stood along the walls, all watching him with expressions he couldn't read. The only sound was his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Empress Yuna spoke, her voice like music from an instrument Tae-hyun had never heard. He understood nothing. But then the android beside the child stepped forward and spoke in human language. "The Empress welcomes you, Tae-hyun of the human colony New Seoul," the android said. Its voice was gentle, almost kind. "I am Dal, guardian and companion to Princess Nari. You know the princess, though you did not know her title when she visited your establishment." Tae-hyun looked at the small child. Nari, who smiled at him shyly. She waved with her small hand. Despite everything, despite the terror and confusion, he found himself smiling back. The Empress spoke again, and Dal translated. "2 weeks ago, my daughter escaped her protective detail during a covert visit to your station. She should not have been able to do this. We are still investigating how she managed it." There was a slight tone of humor in Dal's translation that might have been the android's own addition. "When she was found hours later, she was in your repair shop watching you work. She refused to leave until you finished. My guards wanted to extract her immediately, but she became so distressed that I ordered them to wait and observe." Tae-hyun's mind reeled. He'd been watched the entire time? Guards had been there while he worked through the night? The Empress continued. "You must understand what you accomplished, Tae-hyun. Dal is not merely a toy. Dal was built by my late husband, Emperor Junwoo, before his death 3 years ago. Dal contains memory cores with recordings of my husband's voice, his image, his teachings for our daughter. When Dal was damaged during an assassination attempt on Nari, we believed those memories were lost forever." Dal's voice carried weight now, translating the Empress's words with perfect precision. "Every technician in my empire examined Dal. The finest engineers, the most skilled artificers, the master craftsmen who build our ships. All of them said the same thing. The damage was too severe. The memory cores were too delicate. Any attempt to repair Dal would destroy what remained of my husband's voice." The Empress stood from her throne. Even from across the vast room, Tae-hyun could see tears glittering in her eyes. She descended the steps slowly, with Nari holding her hand, until she stood directly before him. This close he could see she was tall, perhaps 7 feet. But her grief was human-sized and unmistakable. "I had accepted this loss," Dal translated as the Empress spoke. "I told my daughter that her father's voice lived in our hearts. That memory was enough. But a child should not have to lose her father's voice so young. I mourned this second death of my beloved." The Empress placed her hand on Dal's shoulder. The android looked at her with what seemed like genuine affection. "Then my daughter, clever and determined like her father, slipped away from her guards. She found a human mechanic in a dirty shop on a failing station. She could not speak his language. She had nothing to offer him. She was just a crying child with a broken toy." Nari stepped forward and took Tae-hyun's hand. She spoke in her wind chime language, and Dal translated. "Thank you for being kind when you didn't have to be. Thank you for trying when everyone else said it was impossible." The Empress knelt, bringing herself closer to Tae-hyun's height, which was both remarkable and terrifying. An empress kneeling before a mechanic. "You did what an empire could not," she said through Dal. "You gave my daughter her father's voice back. Last night, Nari heard her father tell her a bedtime story for the first time in 3 years. This morning, Dal played a recording of Junwoo teaching Nari to count in our ancient language. These moments I thought were lost forever. You have restored. She stood and gestured widely. Name your reward. Wealth? Territory? A noble title? I offer you a governorship of an entire sector. I offer you technology beyond human dreams. I offer you anything within my power to give. Tae-hyun found his voice, though it came out rough. I don't want anything. I just fixed a toy for a sad kid. Anyone would have done the same. The translation caused a ripple through the court. Whispers echoed in the vast space. The Empress's eyes widened slightly. You refuse? Dal translated, and there was definitely surprise in the android's voice now. I'm not refusing to be rude, Tae-hyun said quickly. I'm honored, really, but I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because she was crying, and I could maybe help, that's all. More whispers. One courtier stepped forward, looking outraged, and spoke rapidly to the Empress. Dal didn't translate, but Tae-hyun could guess. In their culture, refusing an Empress's gift was probably a terrible insult. But the Empress held up one hand, silencing the court. She looked at Tae-hyun for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. You are genuine, she said through Dal. In a galaxy full of those who would leverage any advantage, who would use my grief as currency for gain, you ask for nothing. This is either the behavior of a fool or a truly good soul. I do not believe you are a fool. She turned to the court and spoke loudly, her voice carrying authority that needed no translation. Dal provided the words anyway. I declare Tae-hyun a friend of the crown, a title given only thrice before in the history of our empire. He is under the protection of the imperial house. Any who harm him harm the Empress herself. Any who honor him honor me. She removed a ring from her finger, a simple band that glowed with soft blue light. She took Tae-hyun's hand and placed the ring on his finger. It adjusted itself to fit perfectly. This ring will identify you anywhere in the Imperium. You will be granted safe passage, assistance, and respect. This is not a reward you can refuse, Tae-hyun. It is a fact. You are now and forever a friend of my house. Nari hugged him suddenly, wrapping her small arms around his waist. She said something in her language that sounded like friend. Dal placed one metallic hand on Tae-hyun's shoulder and spoke without translating for the Empress. You have given me back my purpose and my memories. I will not forget this kindness. Hours later, Tae-hyun was returned to New Seoul Station in the same shuttle, his head spinning. The ring on his finger felt no heavier than any other ring, but he understood it weighed more than anything he'd ever carried. When he stepped out of the shuttle, the entire station had gathered again. Administrator Lee rushed forward, desperate for information. What happened? What did they want? Are we in danger? Tae-hyun looked at the ring on his finger, at the massive ship still hanging in orbit, at the faces of his neighbors and fellow colonists staring at him with fear and hope. I think, he said slowly, I just became important, and I have no idea what that means. The Valerian ships departed that night, vanishing into the darkness between stars. But Tae-hyun's simple life had departed with them, and he suspected it was never coming back. 3 months after the Valerian ships departed, Tae-hyun's life had become unrecognizable. His small repair shop, once struggling to make rent, now had a line of customers every morning. Everyone suddenly needed something fixed. Everyone wanted to meet the man who was friends with an alien empress. Tae-hyun tried to maintain normalcy. He still fixed mining equipment and personal devices. He still ate cheap noodles and worked late into the night. But normal was gone, and it wasn't coming back. The first corporation arrived within a week of the Valerians' departure. They called themselves Stellar Dynamics, and they offered Tae-hyun 10 million credits for his shop and his consulting services. When he refused, they smiled and left. The second corporation offered 20 million. The third offered a percentage of their entire operation. "You don't understand," the executive from Helios Industries said, leaning across Tae-hyun's cluttered desk. "You have access to the Valerian Imperium. Do you know what their technology is worth? One ship drive could revolutionize human space travel. One weapon system could change the balance of power in the galaxy." "I fixed a toy," Tae-hyun said for what felt like the 100th time. "I don't have access to anything." "But you could," the executive pressed. "That ring on your finger opens doors. Work with us. Everyone benefits." When Tae-hyun refused again, the executive's smile became cold. "Think carefully about who your friends are, Mr. Tae-hyun. The galaxy is a dangerous place for those without powerful allies." That night, someone tried to break into his shop. Station security caught them, but the message was clear. Refusing the corporations had consequences. Administrator Lee called him in for a private meeting. The old man looked tired, older than he had 3 months ago. "The colonial government has been in contact," Lee said. "They want you to come to Earth. They want you to be part of diplomatic preparations for formal relations with the Valerian Imperium." "I'm a mechanic, not a diplomat." "You're the only human with a direct connection to their empress," Lee said. "Whether you like it or not, you've become politically significant. The government can protect you better than I can here." Tae-hyun thought about it. He thought about leaving his shop, his home, everything familiar. But he also thought about the break-in, about the corporations circling like sharks, about the weight of the ring on his finger. "I need to think about it," he said. He never got the chance. The attack came on a Thursday night. Tae-hyun was closing up the shop when the lights went out. He heard the door crash open, heard footsteps, too many to count. He grabbed a heavy wrench and backed toward the rear exit. "No need for that, human," a voice said in accented human language. "We're not here to rob you." The emergency lights flickered on, revealing 6 figures in dark armor. But they weren't human. They were Valerian, and they moved with the deadly precision of trained killers. The leader stepped forward, removing their helmet. The face beneath was elegant and cold, with none of the warmth Tae-hyun had seen in Empress Yuna or young Nari. "I am June of House Makari," the Valerian said. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. That ring, the Empress's favor. You will give them both back." "I can't give back favor," Tae-hyun said, his heart hammering. "And the Empress gave me this ring. It's not yours." "The Empress is weak," June spat. "She dishonors our people by elevating a primitive human. You are nothing. You should be nothing. Your death will prove to the Imperium that humans are not worthy of Imperial protection." The assassins raised their weapons. Tae-hyun knew he was about to die. He thought of Nari's smile, of Dal's gentle voice, of the Empress kneeling before him. He'd made a crying child happy. If that was worth dying for, then maybe it wasn't such a bad way to go. The weapons fired. Tae-hyun closed his eyes, but the pain never came. He opened his eyes to find a shimmering blue shield surrounding him. The assassin's energy blasts dissipated against it like rain on glass. And standing between him and the killers were 4 new Valerians in different armor, marked with symbols that blazed with light. "Imperial Guard," one of them said in a voice that brooked no argument. "By order of Empress Yuna, Tae-hyun is under permanent protection. Those who threaten him threaten the crown itself." The fight was brief and brutal. June's assassins were skilled, but the Imperial Guard were better. Within minutes, the assassins were disarmed and restrained. June himself stood in the center of the shop, his elegant face twisted with rage. "This proves everything," he snarled. "The Empress wastes our warriors protecting human trash. She has gone mad with grief, and the Imperium suffers for it." The lead guard struck June across the face, a blow that sent the noble crashing into Tae-hyun's workbench. "You will be silent," the guard said. "You will be returned to the home world for trial." Attempting to assassinate a friend of the crown is treason of the highest order. As the guards led the prisoners away, the leader turned to Tae-hyun. Her face was stern but not unkind. "We have been watching you since the Empress granted her favor," she said. "We knew attempts would be made. Both human and Valerian factions see you as either an opportunity or a threat." "I just want to fix things and be left alone," Tae-hyun said, his voice shaking now that the danger had passed. "That is no longer possible," the guard said. "The Empress anticipated this. She requests your presence on the homeworld, not as a command, but as an offer of sanctuary. Here, you will always be in danger. There, under the direct protection of the Imperial House, you would be safe." Tae-hyun looked around his shop. The walls he'd painted himself, the workbench his father had given him, the life he'd built from nothing. "And if I refuse? We will continue to protect you. But the Empress hopes you will accept. She has a proposition for you, one she believes you will find interesting. She asks only that you hear her out." Tae-hyun thought about the corporations, about Jun's hatred, about the target he now carried simply for being kind to a child. He thought about how the galaxy had suddenly become much bigger and much more dangerous. He thought about Nari's smile and Dal's gratitude. He thought about the Empress kneeling before him, tears in her eyes, thanking him for doing what any decent person would do. "When do we leave?" he asked. The guard's stern expression softened slightly, almost a smile. "A ship will arrive tomorrow. Pack only what matters to you. Everything else can be replaced." That night, Tae-hyun stood in his shop for the last time, running his hands over the familiar tools, the worn workbench, the patched equipment. This had been his life, his dream, his identity. But maybe, he thought, some dreams were meant to grow into something bigger, something stranger, something that involved alien empresses and rescued princesses and a galaxy that suddenly needed what he had to offer. He touched the ring on his finger. It was warm, pulsing gently, with that same blue light. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, an empress waited to offer him a new purpose. Somewhere out there, a little girl remembered the kind mechanic who fixed her most precious possession. Tae-hyun began to pack. His small life was ending, but perhaps something greater was just beginning. The Valerian homeworld was called Vel-Ara, and it was beautiful in a way that made Earth seem plain. Crystal spires reached toward 3 moons. Cities of light sprawled across continents covered in forests that glowed softly in the darkness. The sky itself seemed alive with colors Tae-hyun had no names for. The Imperial Palace sat on a mountain that touched the clouds. When Tae-hyun's transport landed in the gardens, Nari was waiting for him with Dal at her side. She ran to him, chattering in her language, and Dal translated. "Princess Nari says she has missed you. She has been practicing human words to greet you properly." The android paused. "She would like to try now." Nari took a deep breath and spoke carefully in human language. "Hello, friend Tae-hyun. Welcome home." Tae-hyun felt tears prick his eyes. He knelt down to her level. "Hello, Nari. It's good to see you again." Empress Yuna appeared on a balcony above, wearing simpler robes than before, but no less regal. She descended stairs that seemed carved from solid light, and when she reached them, she placed one hand on her daughter's head, affectionately. "Thank you for coming," she said, and Tae-hyun realized she was speaking human language herself now, with only a slight accent. "I have been learning your tongue. It seems appropriate if we are to work together." "Work together?" Tae-hyun asked. "Walk with me," she said. "There is much to discuss." They walked through gardens where impossible flowers bloomed. Nari held both their hands, swinging between them like any happy child. Dal followed at a respectful distance. "Jun's attempt on your life was not an isolated incident," Yuna said. There are factions within my empire who believe I have grown weak, grief-stricken. They say I dishonor my late husband's memory by showing favor to humans. I'm sorry, Taehyun said. I never meant to cause problems. You caused no problems. You revealed problems that already existed. She stopped beside a fountain that flowed upward instead of down. For centuries, the Valerian Imperium has stood apart from other species. We believed ourselves superior. We traded with other civilizations but never truly engaged with them. Never truly saw them as equals. My husband, Junwoo, wanted to change that. He believed isolation made us stagnant. He believed other species had value beyond their utility to us. She smiled sadly. It is one of many reasons I loved him. But he died before he could make those changes, and I was left to rule alone with a young daughter and a court full of traditionalists. Nari tugged on her mother's hand, and Yuna picked her up, holding her close. Then you appeared, Yuna continued, a human mechanic with no agenda, no political aspirations, no desire for gain. You saw a crying child and you helped her. Not because of who she was or what you could get, but because it was the right thing to do. It was just a toy, Taehyun said, uncomfortable with her intensity. It was my husband's voice. It was my daughter's connection to her father. It was irreplaceable, and you replaced it. She set Nari down and faced Taehyun fully. You are proof that my husband was right, that other species, humans especially, have something we Valerians have lost in our centuries of power. What's that? Compassion without calculation. The ability to help someone simply because they need help, without wondering what you'll gain. She gestured broadly. I want you to be my liaison to humanity. Not a diplomat in the traditional sense, but a bridge. A living example of what cooperation between our species could accomplish. Taehyun's head spun. I don't know anything about politics or diplomacy. Good. I have advisors for politics and diplomacy. What I need is someone who represents the best of humanity. Someone genuine. Before he could respond, First Envoy Minho appeared, moving quickly. His expression was grave. Your Majesty, the Galactic Council has issued a formal challenge. Noble June's house has filed a complaint, claiming your favor toward humans violates established protocols for first contact and species elevation. Yuna's expression hardened. When? The hearing is in 3 days, on the Council homeworld. Your presence is requested and... Minho glanced at Taehyun. His. The Galactic Council was older than most civilizations. Their chamber was a massive sphere where representatives from 40 different species floated in designated sections, gravity and atmosphere adjusted for each. At the center, a platform held those called to testify. Taehyun stood on that platform beside Empress Yuna, feeling smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. Thousands of alien beings watched him, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. Translation devices hummed, rendering speech into dozens of languages simultaneously. A being that looked like living crystal spoke first. Empress Yuna, you stand accused of granting unprecedented favor to a primitive species. The human Taehyun has been elevated beyond established protocols. Explain yourself. Yuna stood tall, every inch an empress. I stand accused of recognizing genuine worth. Should I apologize for that? You have granted a human the title Friend of the Crown, another representative said, this one resembling a pillar of smoke. This title places him above many of our own species in diplomatic precedence. What makes humans worthy of such status? Ask him yourself, Yuna said, stepping aside. All eyes turned to Taehyun. He wanted to run. He wanted to be back in his shop, fixing simple machines, living his simple life. But Nari was watching from the gallery with Dal. The Empress had placed her trust in him. And somewhere in this chamber were species who needed to understand that humans weren't looking to dominate or conquer. They were just trying to survive, and maybe help others along the way. Tae-hyun took a breath and spoke. I'm nobody special. I'm a mechanic from a failing colony. 3 months ago, a kid came into my shop with a broken toy. She was crying. I didn't know she was a princess. I didn't know the toy was important. I just knew she was sad, and maybe I could help. So you seek to claim nobility through accident? Someone challenged. No, Tae-hyun said. I'm trying to say that humans don't need to be technologically advanced or politically powerful to have value. We help people because they need help, not because of what we'll get, not because of who they are, just because it's the right thing to do. Pretty words, the crystal being said. But what substance backs them? What substance do you need? Tae-hyun asked, frustration finally breaking through his fear. You're asking me to prove that humans deserve respect in the galaxy. But respect isn't something you prove with weapons or technology. It's something you earn by how you treat others when you don't have to treat them well, when there's nothing in it for you. He pointed at the gallery where Nari sat. That little girl means the world to her mother. An entire empire couldn't fix what was broken. I did it because she asked me to, with tears in her eyes and hope in her heart. If that's not enough to earn basic decency from this council, then maybe the problem isn't with humans. Silence fell over the chamber. Tae-hyun realized he might have just insulted the most powerful governing body in the galaxy, but he was too exhausted to care anymore. Then Nari stood up in the gallery. Dal tried to stop her, but she pushed forward and spoke clearly in the human language she'd been practicing. Tae-hyun good. Tae-hyun kind. He helped when no one else could. She switched to her own language, and Dal translated. When I was scared and alone, when my most precious possession was broken, this human didn't ask who I was or what he would gain. He just helped me. That's what humans do. They see someone who needs help and they give it. Yuna stepped forward. My daughter speaks truth. In all my empire, with all our advanced technology and brilliant minds, no one could restore what Tae-hyun restored with inferior tools and improvised solutions, not because he was more skilled, but because he approached the problem with compassion rather than calculation. She addressed the council directly. This is why I value humanity. They possess something many of us have forgotten in our pursuit of power and advancement. They still remember how to care about someone they just met, how to try when failure seems certain, how to help without asking for payment. The crystal being shifted, light refracting through its body. These are children's virtues. How do they serve in the real galaxy? Children's virtues? Tae-hyun spoke up again. Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs. You're all so focused on being powerful and advanced that you've forgotten how to be kind. How to help someone just because they need it. Humans aren't perfect, but at least we still try to be decent to each other. More silence. Then, from the back of the chamber, a representative Tae-hyun hadn't heard speak stood. They resembled a flowing river given form. I move to withdraw the challenge. The human speaks uncomfortable truths, but truths nonetheless. Perhaps we should question why kindness is viewed as weakness rather than strength. One by one, other representatives agreed. The challenge was withdrawn. June's house was censured for attempting to assassinate a friend of the crown, and several species expressed interest in establishing formal relations with humanity, citing Tae-hyun's testimony. When it was over, Yuna stood before Tae-hyun. You have changed the galaxy's view of humanity in a single afternoon. Do you understand what you've done? I told the truth, Tae-hyun said. That's all I know how to do. Yuna smiled. That is precisely why you are valuable. 6 months later, Tae-hyun stood in his repair shop. Not the old one on New Seoul Station, but a new one on Velara. Humans and Valerians came to him now, sometimes for repairs, sometimes just to talk. He'd become a symbol of cooperation between species, though he still thought of himself as just a mechanic. Nari visited him every day after her lessons. She was learning human engineering now, sitting at his workbench while he taught her how to fix simple things. Dal watched over them both, the android's presence a constant reminder of how everything had changed. And sometimes, late at night, Empress Una would visit. She would sit in his simple shop, free from the weight of her crown, and they would talk about engineering and children and loss and hope. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him one evening. "Helping Nari that day? Your life would be much simpler if you hadn't." Tai-hyun looked at Nari, asleep with her head on his workbench, tools scattered around her. He looked at Dal, standing guard. He looked at the ring on his finger and the galaxy beyond his shop window. "Not even for a second," he said. "Sometimes the right thing to do is the simplest thing. Help someone who needs help. Everything else just follows from there." Una smiled, and in that moment, she wasn't an empress. She was just a grateful mother whose daughter had found a friend. And Tae-hyun was just a mechanic who had fixed a broken toy for a crying child, and in doing so had shown the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or warfare. It was simply knowing how to care.